we see a lot of nationalism and populism manifesting, in different ways around the world, whether it's the Brexit situation, whether it's elections, United States or abroad. There seems to be a very populist viewpoint that are coming out of a lot of the different elections and decisions being made. Do these developments pose serious threats to the global economy? And I'll ask this, and maybe also of you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, Terry, of course they do. And as I look at it, if I look at it more broadly, I see the global economy, the world changing faster than our ability to govern it. And then when I look at individual economies, I think the modern economies pose challenges that our policies aren't really responding to. And so the key is how do you develop policies that work in today's modern world? And this is ultimately a political decision. So it's a decision that authoritarian governments are dealing with, China and so on. Their present policies aren't going to really work in the future. They're going to need to keep changing them. And of course, our Western democracies have these problems. So we have big groups of people that feel disaffected by the pace of change. They've been left behind. And so we have, this is where populism comes from, nativism, nationalism. And so the challenge really is a political challenge. It's a chicken or an egg. The political situation is created by unhappy, disaffected people, and then of course that creates a political systems that make it hard to respond with the right policy response. So it's in many ways political issues are economic issues and vice versa. And so those are the enemies, and I think that's one of the biggest risks, particularly we face in the West.
Mr. Chairman.
So the integration of the global economy, the expansion of trade, expansion of human movement, immigration is not going to be reversed. This is pretty much here to stay, but on the margin, it can be affected, with political resistance and populist and nativist policies. So, and that in turn can be costly, and it can slow growth, it can disrupt markets. We've seen how markets have responded to some of the discussions of trade wars, for example. So I agree with Hank, which I think the premise is that if you want people to accept change, if you want people to accept, the tremendous dynamism that a global economy has, you got to help them adapt to change. You got to make it a little bit less scary, and I think there is a case for helping people adapt, whether it's through allowing them to get their skills that they need, or helping them to move from one area to another where the jobs are. I think from a self-preservation perspective, if you want to preserve the dynamism of the global economy, you got to make people able and willing to accept that dynamism.
Right. Eddie, let me follow up with you just a little bit on that. Do you think that education and training would help as it relates to some of these populist trends that we're seeing?
Well, I'm always in favor of education and training, since that's what I sell.
Right.
But going back to the points that were made by Ben and Hank, I think those are right on. And there's no doubt that education and training helps, but education and training, remember, is a long-run kind of investment. It's not a short-run investment. And the reason for that is that if you start, even if we were to reform all of our schools along the lines of what Dr. Chan was talking about in the last session, and we were tremendously successful, you're still talking about that happening a generation later, because it takes time for that to move its way into the economy. So one thing that we can be thinking about, though, and I know this sounds counter to some of the current rhetoric, is that we can start bringing more people in who have the skills and education and the kinds of training that we need. One of the things that shows up in the research on immigration and entrepreneurship is that immigrants tend to be very entrepreneurial. And we know that, for example, that they're almost twice as entrepreneurial as the native-born population. So there are things that we can do that will at least facilitate some of these transitions in the short run. Again, those are political kinds of considerations, and it's easier said than done, but there's certainly things we should be thinking about.
I would just add, I would add that some of the things you can do have maybe a better short-run payoff if they help with transitions. If you help retrain, help people move, if you have apprenticeships, technical training of various kinds. I mean, there are some patches you can do,
Yep.
but clearly you want to try to address the long-run issues of appropriate skills for the workforce and so on.
Absolutely.
I would say this, I don't think our democracy is going to work. I don't think our political system is going to work unless we figure out how to have growth be more inclusive. We can't leave so many people behind. We have still big numbers of working age people not working. Given the opioid problem, given high levels of incarceration, and given income disparity, I don't think that we are going to be able to continue to grow, fix our political system unless we figure out how to deal with that.
Mr. Secretary, since you told me to call you Hank, you were the first to call attention to the increasing gap between the richest and the poorest in the United States. How do you believe that gap has contributed to the state of partisan politics, if at all?
Yeah, I think, Terry, I think this group is probably answered that. I even when I was still at Goldman Sachs in 2006, I was fascinated and disturbed by income disparity, not just in the US, but all over the world. And I really do believe that for our political system to work longer term, there has to be, it's difficult to work with that level of disparity. So obviously, it's a significant issue. It's one that predated the financial crisis. Right. There are all kinds of structural issues that were causing it. I think automation and technology, are having a major impact. And I'm not going to argue against that. And technology is doing a wonderful job of helping a lot of people, rise out of poverty. It's got great potential. But I firmly believe in the United States of America right now, it's killing more jobs than it's creating. And automation is really putting pressure, on wages. And I think this poses a huge challenge.
As everyone knows, children are our future. And it appears that they'll be inheriting a lot of different issues from our generations and others. I'm curious on what your thoughts are for the next generation of leaders and kids today. And when you talk, and Ed, I'll start with you, and then maybe Mr. Secretary and Mr. Chairman, you can wrap it up.
Well, I'm very optimistic. I view it as a real privilege to teach at Stanford. The students that I have are just unbelievably talented people. And it was true when I taught at University of Chicago, and of course, these are elite schools, but I'm not quite as pessimistic about the young generation. I think, while there may be something wrong with kids today, there may be something wrong with us as well in terms of the way we treat them. So, I guess I would still push opportunities. I think that one of the things that we see is that our students are moving in directions where the opportunities are available, and as long as we create an environment such that those opportunities are going to continue to exist, we'll have the students doing the right thing. That said, I would issue one caution, and I do think that we've become a little bit more closed-minded in academia than we were in the past, and that's probably not the students. Students are always think that they have the truth. You look at the three of us, we're all bald, which means that we went to school during the Vietnam War times, and there was no, you're a little younger, Ben, sorry.
Hey, listen, don't get them mad.
Hank and I are
Don't get them
together.
mad.
Class of 68.
Yeah, I mean, there was no more tumultuous time than that. But the difference was that while we thought we knew everything, there were people who pushed back, and that was true among the faculty, among the media, and among the intelligentsia. And I think right now, the one thing that I would say we have to worry about is that those other three groups are not pushing back perhaps as hard as they should.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, and then Mr. Chairman.
Well, I think the if we're optimistic, it's really got to come from the young people, because all the issues we talked about today were about whether it's the national debt or whether it's our political system or some of the issues we didn't talk about, like in, climate change and, environmental risk. These are generational equity. And the thing that concerns me the most about our country is it's older people that are involved in the political system, and they're being very selfish because we're not investing in the young. If you run a company, what you do is you're always looking for young talent and you're investing in young people. We as a nation are underinvesting in our young people. And I'm really, really impressed by the young people I see, but, on the campuses. But if I had a caution, it'd be the same one Ed raised, because I'll say it a little bit blunter. I think I see so much political correctness, so much talking about people's safe spaces, worrying about hurting someone's feeling. And I also see a lack of patriotism, because it really, if we're going to meet the challenges we need to make, it's going to take, I think, a greater sense of patriotism from young people. But again, the energy, the ability you see from young people is tremendous, and that's really our future.
Mr. Chairman.
Well, I think there's an awful lot of noise which comes from the political system, and all that's very important, but there's an awful lot going on underneath, this is a very strong country, a very diverse country. An example, what's happened this is Texas, so what's happened in energy, right? I mean, we were, 40 years ago, we were worried about running out of oil. Now, of course, North America is pretty much self-sufficient. So there is a lot of ability to adapt, there's a lot of ability to make progress. I do think that there is a challenge, which is putting aside all these social issues, which are very important. I think that the progress on artificial intelligence, which could make huge changes in our economy very quickly at some point, was going to be very challenging to our political and social structure, because some people are probably going to find themselves redundant in a traditional economic sense. How are they going to adapt? Right. Others are going to have tremendous opportunities based on these new technologies. So I think that technology, which is just beginning really to become relevant to, to the economy, is going to create some very big social and economic challenges in the next 25 years.